Welcome to the EasyViz Tableau Made Easy series. Today, we'll continue to build on the dashboard we made in the last video. In this video, I'll show you how to implement dynamic measures, I'll show you how to turn our summary into a slicer for those measures, and also how to implement a super easy intuitive custom date filter. Our dashboard currently only shows the order count measure, which is the way we've set up our visualizations in episode 1. In our summary, we have 3 measures: order count, profit, and sales. Let's modify our dashboard so that when the user clicks one of these, it will show the respective measure in our graphs. Let's go to one of our worksheets segment. We can see that the measure being used currently is order count. However, we're going to need a measure that can toggle between our 3 measures. To do this, we're going to need a custom formula as well as a parameter. Let's click this arrow to create a new parameter. Let's call this selected measure. We'll change the data type to string and we'll make it a list. And in our list, we'll put our 3 items: order, sales, and profit. Let's expose this measure by right-clicking it and showing the parameter. Now we can see our measure here and we can switch between the 3 options we created. Next, let's make a formula that will toggle between our 3 measures based on what parameter we selected. So the formula is a simple if statement. If our selected measure is order, then we'll get the count of orders. Else, if our selected measure is profit, then we'll get the sum of profit. Otherwise, it'll just give us the sum of sales. We'll call this toggle measure. Let's replace our measure in our columns with our new toggle measure and see how this all behaves. Now we can see when we select a measure, our visualization will change accordingly. Let's remove this header. Let's go through each of the sheets, replacing our measure with our new toggle measure. When you're done, go to your dashboard and let's expose this measure. Select any of your visualizations, click the arrow, and select parameters and selected measure. This will expose the measure over here. Now when we change this measure, it will change all 6 of our visualizations. Let's drag our measure filter up to the top and we'll change this to be a single value select. We can provide an alternative interaction where if the user clicks these measures in the summary, it will change this parameter. Go to Dashboard, Actions, then add an action to change parameter. We'll call this change measure parameter. Then deselect all of your dashboard sheets except for the summary sheet. Next, in the target parameters, click selected measure, and in the source field, click measure names. Click OK again. Now we've turned our simple summary into a slicer. You can notice that the order count button doesn't seem to be working or changing the measure. That's because the name of your measure has to match the text that you entered into your parameter. Let's fix this by going into our summary sheet, right-clicking measure names, edit the alias, and change the order count alias to orders. We also have to change this in our parameter, right-click edit, and in our orders, we'll change it to orders. We also have to change this in our toggle measure. Right-click, edit, and if the selected measure is now orders, then we'll return the count of orders. Let's go back to our dashboard and see if that's worked. Now if we select sales, we can see it selected the right parameter and it's showing the right measure. Same with profit, and orders is also working. You'll notice one issue when you select a large measure like sales, these number labels aren't formatted very nicely. It becomes very difficult to read, but I have a separate video that I'll link and it'll explain how to make these labels dynamically change with your measures. For the purposes of this video, I'll just quickly implement it. Go to one of your sheets, create a calculated field and call it toggle measure normalized. This formula basically takes your value and it'll divide it out and normalize it. Replace your label with the normalized value instead. And now you can see instead of showing the full number, it shows the divided out number. Next, create a new calculated field and use this formula. We'll call this toggle measure suffix, and this will check the toggle measure, and depending on how large the value is, it'll put the correct suffix for billions, millions, thousands, or blank. Add this into your label and format. Create another formula for the prefix. Use this formula, it checks the selected measure, and if it's orders, it's going to return blank, and if it's anything else, it'll return a $sign. We'll call this toggle measure prefix. Drag this into your labels and format again. You can see now we have sales selected, we have a $sign, and same with profit. However, when we select orders, there is no $sign. Next, we need to format away these decimal places. So take your normalized value, right click, in default properties number format, we'll change this to number standard. Now do this for all your sheets. Let's go back to our dashboard and see how that looks. So when we select profit, you can see all our labels are nice and neat. It works with orders and it works with sales. In most dashboards, you're going to need some sort of date filter. In our data set, order date seems to be the most logical choice. Let's bring this out into filters and see what that looks like. Tableau's default date filters are pretty handy. There's a start and end date which you can type or use as calendar. There's also a slider which you can change and it will change the order date range. Alternatively, you can change this to relative dates, and in the drop-down, you'll have a comprehensive menu that will allow you to select any sort of relative date you like. You can leave your date filter like this, but it's missing a few things. For example, you can't easily select the full fiscal year. I like to make my own custom filter to allow the user to easily select the date ranges they need. Create a new parameter. We'll call it selected date range. We'll change the type to string and we'll make it a list. Here is where you would add the different options for date ranges for your user. My example, I'm going to add a few. Let's give our user all time, last year, last quarter, last month, year to date, quarter to date, month to date, last fiscal year, current fiscal year, and custom dates. Let's expose this parameter. Now, based on this selected parameter, we want to filter out order dates. This is a bit complicated because we have to use some date calculations. So let's do this on a new sheet. Create a new sheet, expose our selected date range again, and let's get started with the formula. Let's start with last year, and you can extrapolate these formulas for all the other date ranges. Our formula needs to calculate a date range based on our selected date range. So let's create a formula for the start date. If our selected date range is equal to last year, then we want to return today, but we will use a date trunk to return the start of the year. So you go date trunk, year of today. Let's see what that looks like. Let's rename this formula date filter start. Drag this into our text, make it an exact date, and you can see it gives us the start of our current year, but we want last year. So let's edit this formula. Right click, edit. We'll wrap this around in a date add year -1 and close the bracket. So basically it takes today, it truncates it down to the year, which will return the first day of the year, and then we add -1 years to that value. So you can see now our date start gives 1st of January 2022, which is what we want when we select the last year date range. Next, we're going to do a similar thing for date end. So find your formula, duplicate it, and edit it. We'll call this date filter end. And instead of subtracting a whole year from the start of the date, we just want to subtract one day. That way we get today, and then we get the start of the year, and one day before that is the end of the previous year. Let's drag this into text and see how it looks. Change it to exact date. And you can see now our last year is selected. We have a start date that represents the start of the year, and we have an end date that represents the end of the year. Now let's make this work for last quarter and last month in a similar manner. Right-click your start date and edit, and we'll modify the formula like this. It's the same as the first one, except when we select last quarter, it will take the start of the current quarter, subtract the quarter from it, and then it will take the start of the current month and subtract the month from it. Let's copy the same pattern for date end. You can see when we select last quarter, we take the start of the current quarter and subtract the day. If we select last month, we take the start of the current month and we subtract one day. Now you can see our filter works for last quarter. So it'll take the start and end of the last quarter, and last month, which will take the start and end of the last month. Next, let's make this work for year to date. It'll be a similar formula, but slightly different. Right-click your start date, edit, and we'll add in this formula. So if the selected date range is year to date, then we just want to take the date trunk of today, which will give us the start of the year. The end date is quite simple. Right-click, edit. This line of code just checks that it's year to date, and then it's just going to return today. So now we can see the year to date option will return the start of the year and today's date as its date range. Let's continue this pattern and make this work for quarter to date and month to date. So the formula just checks if it's QTD, then it'll date trunk the quarter, or month to date, and it'll date trunk the month. Let's make the same modification to our end date. And this one's even simpler because whether it's year to date, quarter to date, or month to date, we just want to return today's date. Now we can see when we select year to date, we have the start of the year and today's date. When we select quarter to date, we have the start of the quarter and today's date. And finally, when we select month to date, we have the start of the current month and today's date. The next one we want to do is quite tricky. It's the fiscal years. This formula is a bit tricky, so I'll walk you through it step by step. Essentially, if you just want to check selected date range is equal to the current fiscal year, then we want to create a date that looks something like this. So my fiscal year starts in July because I'm from Australia, but essentially when we select the current financial year, we want to return the start of the fiscal year. How do we make it do this? You can see the month and the date, no matter what fiscal year you're in, always stay the same. It's always going to be July and the 1st. It's only the year that changes. If we're in the month before July, for example, January, February, or March, we want this to go back to the previous year. And if we're in a month after July, such as August, September, or October, we just want it to be on the same year as today. So let's change this static year. If the month of today is greater or equal to 7, then we just want to return the year of today. Else, we want to return the year of today minus 1 and end. We'll need to do a similar formula for end date. So let's edit this formula and we'll copy in our start date function, except this time, instead of returning the July 1st, we want 30th of June, which is the end of all fiscal years. And instead of offsetting the date by a year, we actually want to add a year. Let's select the current FY, and now we can see our formula correctly returns the start of this current financial year and the end of this current financial year. Let's make a similar change for date end. So right click edit, we'll copy our formula above. Then we'll change this to last FY. Then we'll subtract a year from both years. So we'll get rid of this +1, and in the other one, let's add a -1. So now you can see our last financial year will give us the correct dates for the previous FY. So it's pretty handy that we have all of these quick selections for all our key date ranges. We also have one for custom dates in case our user wants to enter 2 custom dates themselves. To do this, we're going to need to create parameters. Create a new parameter, call it custom date start. Then we'll change this type to date. Then we'll duplicate this parameter and we'll change it to custom date end. Let's expose both of these parameters. Now in our start and end date formulas, we need to pick up these parameters. So add to your formula, else if selected date range is equal to custom dates, then custom start date. And similarly for your end date, we'll add to it, else if selected date range is equal to custom dates, then custom end date. Now when the user selects this custom date from the dropdown, they can enter any date that they want, and our date range will reflect that accordingly. Finally, let's implement it for all time. So right-click your start date and edit, and for all time, I usually like to just have it at the start of my date range. So I'll check if the selected date range is all time. Then I'll just use the make date function, and I'll just start mine at 2017 1st of Jan. This will encompass all of my data. Let's make a similar change to date end. Else if selected date range is equal to all time, then I'll just return today's date. Now we have our 2 calculated fields for the start and end date that will change depending on the parameter selected. We need to implement this as an actual filter. So we create a calculated field and we check, is the order date greater or equal to our date filter start, and the order date is less than or equal to our date filter end. Basically, it just checks if the order date is between our 2 calculated dates, and we'll call this date filter. Let's change this back to all time, and let's go to our dates sheet. You'll recall from our previous episode, our date just takes the min and the max of the order date. We want to change this to use our new calculated start and end dates. Drag your start date over the minimum date and drag your end date over the maximum date. We'll right click and change both of these to exact dates. Next, let's go to our summary sheet and implement the filter. Drag your date filter in and make sure you select true. We want to apply this filter to certain sheets, so right click it, apply to worksheet, selected worksheets, and we want it to apply to all 6 of our visualizations. But we don't want it to apply to dates. Let's go back to our dashboard. We'll click the summary section and click the triangle, go to parameters and select the parameter we want to show. Let's drag this up to the top. And now we can see when we change this, our entire dashboard will change based on the selected date range in our parameter. Don't forget also, we have to expose our custom start and end date parameters so the user can select custom dates. So click this triangle and expose both those parameters. We'll drag this up next to our dates. Let's make our filters a little bit more readable. So let's drag this filters down here. This will segregate our actual category filters. Then let's add another text box up the top and we'll call this date range. Make it bold as well. Make it centered. We'll drag this under our date range. Now our Superstore data only goes up to December 2022. So I can't show you the year to date and the quarter to date things working because the date ranges are going to be in 2023 at the time of this recording. But that's why we didn't apply the filter to the dates. That way your user will be able to see that based on the date range filtered, there is no data. And just like that, we're done. We've created a custom date range filter where users can easily select pertinent date ranges, as well as select custom ranges where they can enter 2 custom start and end dates. We also implemented a custom measure filter where users can change the measure that they want to view, as well as implemented it as a slicer. In the next video, we'll add even more interactivity by allowing the user to click through these graphs, and it'll take them into a drill down sheet with all of their underlying data. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video in our Tableau Made Easy series, and I'll see you in the next video. If you've enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and if you have any feedback for me, please leave it in the comments.